Well, hello sports fans. Here we go again with another edition of Ask Mark Anything. Today's questions, we have a couple. They're all got a good, nice little neat correlation. So I thought these would tie in nicely together. It was great to have grouped them as such. The first question, or the mainstay question, comes from James Abell. And James Abell is one of our real estate rock stars. He has been to Sales Trainer a couple of times, well, more than a couple of times. He's been there 3 or 4 times, and has utilised our protocols around Prospector. Now, these protocols, I have to explain them for the uninitiated fairly broad, in a broad-based fashion, as best I possibly can. So the question that James asks on the Ask Master Anything, he says, look, I've just listed the seed listing. I'll get back to that in just a moment, using Foothold protocols. So could you go through what happens next? Basically, he talks about going from Foothold to traction. On the list and sell tour, and this strategy, if you like, around prospects permeates all of the Sales Trainer, Steam, leadership, and other programs that we have. It is fundamentally a strategy for securing prospects. Now, when I talk about other protocols or more traditional prospecting methods that have sustained us for a number of years, I can honestly say that most of them don't really follow a strategy other than to simply increase the number of listings, which in turn then increases the number of sales. Now, there's nothing wrong with this. I think we all get that. You know, one of the catch cries that I have, certainly in our sales team leadership course Steam, is GML, get more listings. I say that the solution to any seeming problem in the real estate business is to, in fact, get more listings. Now, the GML protocol works. It gets us more listings, but it doesn't sustain that business for a period of time. So what I say is the fundamental flaw around most protocols is that they aim strategically at production, but they don't, unfortunately, progress your standing as a real estate agent. So we want to have a strategy that is not just productive, but is also progressive. And that's the strategy that we teach inside of List and Sell. It's the strategy that we teach on a leadership level, and it is certainly the strategy that we teach to sustain businesses. Now, this basically goes through 3 phases, and James's question fundamentally relates to the first one, and that is moving from Foothold, which he has a seed or seed listings. That's the aim of the Foothold strategy, to allow you to break a new market, or if you've lost a foothold, as the name suggests, the title suggests, in a market, to also regain or re-enter that market and start to get your, get you into a state of flux is what we call it. Because what we've established, and I know loads of listing protocols, loads of listing prospecting methods seemingly get you listings from a standing start. And I'm the last person in the world to argue whether or not protocols work. In fact, they all work. But what I would like to suggest to you is that some work better than others. Now, the whole purpose of Foothold is, as James has said, is to get you those seed listing, the initial listing or listings. And the aim of this particular phase, the first phase, is to create presence. You see, at the end of the day, the reason that the property sellers call some agents in and preclude others is that some agents have a greater degree of presence. In fact, if you look at any particular service area, we've been able to establish that 60 to as much as 90% of that marketplace is typically controlled by 3 dominant agents. We refer to these as players, the players. The remaining agents or agencies are what we refer to as contenders. They would dearly like to be a player inside the marketplace. Our strategy is designed to allow you to dislodge one of those players and then become, at least in foothold stage, an automatic consideration, to at least be considered, to at least be on the shopping list. And this is gained through creating presence. Now, how do you control presence? Well, it's a very simplistic thing. Presence is dictated by the degree of signage that you have in the area. Now, this protocol, the way that it works, it initially establishes opportunities for you to erect a signboard in the area, obviously through listings, because it's an old catchphrase. If you control signs, you control listings, and vice versa. Now, for years, real estate agents have struggled with this and said to themselves, how do you control one without the other? Well, at the end of the day, what we say is that what you need to do is artificially create that presence. You do this through marketing, and then having established that presence, the listings then bring more listing inquiry. Should you then list them, well, then you've actually done it. So this is what James is talking about. He's achieved those seed listings. So I'll just give you a brief recap because it's not what this question is about. How do we go ahead and secure those listings? And interestingly enough, the other two questions that I have on Ask Mark Anything this morning both relate back to this foothold stage. So I'll digress for just a second. The first and initial way that we do this is we focus on prospecting the main arterial roads. You see, I reason that if you have signage presence, if you have listings, and with those listings associated signs on the main arterial roads, well, then the residents have to frequent those main arterial roads to get to their property. This then, of course, means if you have that presence to any active property seller, you seem like a player. This causes them to call you. So it's by having that presence on the main arterial roads, which most of us don't focus upon because we view these as inferior listings, but these, of course, lead to the better quality listings. One of the ways that we do that is through a letter, a prospecting letter. It's a direct response letter called Fat Boy. And Fat Boy basically says to people that have properties on main roads that they can list their property with you and name the price they want to achieve. In other words, as some of us might view this, overprice the property if that's what they choose to do. I have no problem with this whatsoever because it is an opportunity for a sign, notwithstanding the fact that I focus on market value anyway and not calculating worth and comparative value, but I'll leave that for another session. So with this main road, with this Fat Boy letter, what it says is that they can list the property at their price and then it moves to an offer, and in that offer we basically say that we will pay for the marketing of the property, inclusive of a for sale sign, obviously, inclusive of professional photography and internet advertising. Now, this letter is aimed squarely at some salespeople. Now, I've had a question from Andrew John Roby, and he's asking, is there a copy of Fat Boy letter anywhere? Well, look, you can design your own if you're a client of any of our marketing presentations, seminars, list and sell tour, property careers or otherwise. You simply need to ask and we'll get that across to you. The second question that I have, or the third question I should say, that's coming through today is from Mark Lowry. Mark Lowry has said to me that he has distributed as many as 500 Fat Boys directly to properties and they haven't had one call back. Now, there's a reason for this, and I'm going to hazard a guess and say that this may well apply in Mark Lowry's case in the upper echelon market of the Brisbane city suburb of New Farm. And that reason would probably be that it hasn't been supported with a whole number of other protocols inside the foothold strategy, the foothold phase of Prospector. So I'll just recap what they are. So you've already heard about the letter going out. We also have what we call a for sale card. Now, this is a replication in a postcard fashion of your for sale sign. and you distribute this to the properties, it is no more than your signboard. On one side it might say for sale, you flip it over and it will say maybe have a sold sticker. It has no additions other than your regular for sale board. Preferably no mobile phone number for a salesperson, preferably no photograph of a salesperson, just merely the office number and a replication of that signboard. Now, if this is being distributed quite regularly, we have a plan where it's run out over 6 or 7 weeks. And at the very same time, we have Fat Boy going out. Then we have a number of other additional signs positioned, promotional signs, whether it be on rental properties that your company might be handling, whether it be on properties that you've sold in the past, or whether it be on other solicited listings. So that's the third thing. So we've got Fat Boy going out, we've got the for sale card going out in a postcard fashion, and then of course the third one is indeed having the promotional signs. And then fourth, we have a newsletter going out. Now, not your traditional run-of-the-mill newsletter. Our newsletters satiate or answer to perpetual questions that most people have of real estate agents. That first question, of course, is how's the market? So what we do inside this, in less than 100 words, we tell people how the market is going. Secondly, we then go on to satiate that second question that most property owners have of estate agents after having asked how the market is. They'll say, look, I have this property. What do you think my property might be worth in this marketplace? Yep. So, having actually answered those two questions and then putting a third link into that newsletter, and that is, of course, pictures of people that have sold with your company that have utilized your services, this then becomes a four-pronged attack in Foothold that floods the market with presence. I make no excuses for the fact that it is quite labour intensive. And then fourthly, but not least of all, if you back this up with some other secondary protocols in this Foothold stage, that is calling for sale by owners and soliciting their business, calling to let by owners and soliciting their business, focusing on any listings that might have been withdrawn from the market, whether through the company you're working in or other agents that may have had properties on the market, so chasing those up. Any aged sales inquiry, if you're a business that's been around for a while, I'd be focusing on that again if I was a new salesperson. And then, of course, recent sales that have been made in the market. So there's a bit of detail to that, but all I'm suggesting to you is that these protocols are fashioned so that you are able to secure the initial listing inside that marketplace or listings, preferably on the main road locations, as we've explained to you here. And then, of course, if these are all happening in tandem, I can bet you without any shadow of a doubt that the Fat Boy letter will be getting the response that you're looking for, Mark. And then, of course, if that's not working the way that you want because the Fat Boy letter dictates that you actually put these letters into properties every third or fourth property, never in consecutive properties, you can move to the new version that we have, which is Fat Boy 2. Fat Boy 2 is a blanket drop to the main roads, every single house. It's basically in a brochure fashion. It will get a fairly thick response, but there'll be a bit of work that you have to do to sift through which of those you do and don't want. Now I move to the next part of the equation that Mark was asking about. That James was asking about. James Bell. Give James a bell. Now, James, you were asking me, what do you do once you've got that seed listing? And it's a fascinating thing because when I talk in List and Sell, I ask this question of salespeople just about every session. What is the first thought that comes to your mind after having listed a property? Now, with the majority of salespeople, the first thought they have is selling it, is getting the owner to get their head around the condition of the market if need be. That's, of course, if their expectation is a little high. But how they get it out to the marketplace, how they get buyers through, how they get buyers to the open for inspection, and indeed, how do they sell it? Now, to me, this is a fundamental flaw inside of the real estate transaction. Why? Well, for a start, I've proven that the golden window for selling a property usually occurs between the second and the fourth week. You see, in the first 2 weeks, the relationship is rarely formed between you and a seller. And if it's rarely formed between you and a seller, then there's no real opportunity for you to establish your position as a trusted advisor. Some of you may have noticed this, those of you that are more experienced, if you sell a property very, very quickly, the owner is usually very reluctant to go with the offer in the first stage, even though it's fabulous in your opinion. And then, of course, after a great deal of persuasion, if they do accept that offer, all is well, but they always have in the back of their mind that they maybe could have gotten more. This, of course, really comes home to roost at a later date, a couple of years later, 3 or 4 years later, if they happen to sell again, and they'll make you jump through all the same hoops they did in the first encounter to list that property, fundamentally because the relationship was not formed the last time round. How do you know when a relationship's formed? Well, you communicate with an owner regularly, and it will happen upon a time where that owner says to you, Mark, what do you think we should do? And once that relationship is formed, you pretty much got them for life, so next time you come around to sell it, they'll choose you automatically. So because this doesn't happen inside of the first 2 weeks, I prefer not to go on a go slow. I mean, if it happens, it happens. But I don't focus my energy on selling the property immediately. In fact, I focus my energy squarely and cleanly on leveraging off that listing into another. It's pretty simple. You see, most real estate agents, when they have a listing, they wait until they've sold the property, and it's at that point they start to think about leveraging from that sales result into another listing. Now, I can honestly, it's another subject, but I don't believe they do that terribly well either. Now, I'm not saying that we don't do that, but what I teach at Sales Trainer is the moment that you get a listing, it's the opportune time for you to leverage into yet another one very, very quickly. So the way I explain it to salespeople is that you need to leverage from one listing into another at the front end, not at the back end after the property's been sold. Now, this can be done fairly readily. Now, there's a whole range of ways to do it. Fundamentally, we say that once you've actually got a listing inside a new marketplace, you now have a voice. Given that you have a voice, provided you establish that voice correctly, you can then start to dislodge one of those players, become one of those players, list more properties, and then we get to that ultimate desirable position where the listings, in fact, are bringing in the listings. We call this more equals, basically, more. So how do you do that? Well, there's a series of things that happen. The first thing that will happen is because you're now advertising the property, you will now be generating sales inquiry. That sales inquiry is imperative. Now, this is something that doesn't necessarily go over the heads of salespeople, but they don't realize that the main seam, if there was a seam and we were digging, the main vein of new incoming prospects is in fact your sales inquiry. We have been able to establish over a period of time that for every 5 calls that you're receiving on a listing, whether it be via the telephone, online, or people turning up to your open for inspections, 1 in 5 are actually selling. They are researching the market ahead of selling. Now, this doesn't occur for the life of the listing, but I can honestly tell you that this is happening within the first 4 weeks of that property hitting the market. And where salespeople are falling short is they're not able to qualify these leads, therefore they're not able to leverage. But if what I'm saying is correct, and believe you me, it is, if what I'm saying is correct, and every property, if a property generates a minimum of 10 inquiries in the first month, that then means that there is an opportunity to leverage from that listing into a bare minimum of 2 more. Now, quite often there's more available than this, but in building market share in this phase, James, where we move to traction, that needs to be the focus. How can I quickly turn this listing and leverage off of it into 2 more? So we've already talked about sales inquiry. Now, the important thing with sales inquiry is to understand that when the inquirer when that property seller is researching the market and they initially inquire to you, they're not receptive to being prospected. This is the reason that most of them, in fact, pose as buyers when they're making these inquiries, mainly because they're not ready yet to have a salesperson come at them. Now, why don't they want a real estate agent to come near them at this stage? Well, until such time as they're satisfied themselves that their property is of a value that's greater than or equal to an amount of money that they will get from that property to enable them to do what they want to do, they really don't want to come near real estate agents. That's the first issue. The second issue they have is most of the marketing that real estate agents do does not make a property seller researching the market feel comfortable around this. So that's the second thing that we do. We focus on not trying to solicit business from them during this phase, that first 4 weeks, rather just securing the data so that in 4 weeks' time or longer, we can then come back and indeed focus on qualifying whether or not they are now receptive, they've gotten into that next phase. Now, I don't have time to explain all of that here, but I can say to you that sales inquiry is the first thing that we focus on for leverage. The second thing that we do is, now that we have an opportunity to market this property, we now are able to do open for inspections on them. Now, these have been done not terribly well for a number of years. The bugbear that I have around open for inspections is that they are fairly well generic. They're generically boring. They're not utilised as a marketing exercise. Let's face it, I've been in this game for 30 years, and when I started, property sellers literally walked into your office to let you know that they wanted you to come down and get an idea on price, because the only place they could glean this information was from an estate agent. Nowadays, they're not coming into the office prior to listing a property. They're in fact attending open for inspections, not just yours, but other agents. Now, rather than looking at this as an opportunity to gather or do your best to try to solicit opportunities to list or gathering names and numbers, I focus more on the fact that it is an opportunity to contrast you, your product, and your agency against the competition. How do we do this? Well, you create a unique experience inside the open for inspection. Again, that's a subject for another day, but importantly, I find that whilst some agents have grasped this and have started to make some moves around this, we started in the early days by just giving out simple information packs and contrasted them visually. We've now moved to another space where we're approaching the 5 senses. So we're explaining to salespeople that you have to have an open house experience that looks, sounds, sounds, feels, tastes, and to touch. There's a touch to it that completely blows the opposition out of the water because you're a standout. There's lots of ways you can do this. Just very, very quickly capping through these. Certainly the way that they look, visuals not that difficult. Utilising the word welcome instead of open. Openly inviting property sellers to come, which we'll get to in just a second inside the regenerative. They can smell different. It's very easy to get a scent going in all of your open for inspections by way of a scented candle. That's one way that we're utilising it right now. Other people are using those air wicks or things like that they put inside the house. But again, it has to be a common situation, common to each open for inspection. But at the end of the day, the whole purpose of doing this is to create a contrasted point of difference. You see, I refer to an open for inspection as a virtual listing presentation. It is your opportunity to completely contrast you and your brand against the competition very, very clearly with what we refer to as a viable point of difference. So that's the two. The first is getting that sales inquiry. You now have that opportunity to harness that if you wait for a specific period of time and then go in with some very clever dialogue, you'll start to leverage off listings. Second of all is to create an open for inspection experience that is a standout against that of the competition. What I used to say to my salespeople all the time is that all I really wanted to have happen with us and the competition is that if they walked into one of our open for inspections, they knew they were there, that they were clearly at one of ours as opposed to the competition. And I recommend you do the same. The third and not the least most important component of the traction stage is what we call the regenerative prospecting process. Now, this is a little bit protracted, but I hope it'll make perfect sense to you. You see, when we list a property for sale, every prospective seller can see it. Unfortunately, with our marketing though, we miss the opportunity to capture the prospective seller researching the market that's watching that open for inspection, and instead we appeal more to the dormant property owners with our marketing. We say things like, if you're thinking about selling a property, give us a call and we'll come down, we'll give you an updated opinion on value. Now, I'll show you how, whilst that's not a bad thing, it doesn't necessarily work in the true sense of the word inside of the real prospecting game. You see, the real prospecting game is not to attract dormant property owners that are looking to get an updated opinion on value. The real name of the game is to beat a direct path to people who are selling right now. How do you appeal to those? How do you appeal to what we refer to as active property sellers? Well, you give them information that kind of makes sense. What do I mean by make sense? Well, it has to be around listings that you've got with information that they ideally want to get hold of. Here's a perfect opportunity for you, and just a small example. We say that most agents get it wrong. What they do is they put a for sale sign on a property to begin with. Now, for the active property seller, they see that sign, they are then encouraged or compelled to call up. They'll jump on the internet, try and find out what that property's on the market for. Or they'll call the agency, posing as a buyer, to try and get an idea on price, on where that property sits. Now, if you put a just listed out after the sign's gone up, well, that opportunity's lost on that prospective seller because they've already gotten this information. However, if you reverse the polarity on those two and you get the just listed out before the for sale sign goes up, well, then the chances of that active property seller calling you increase. Now, especially if with that just listed, you remove the photograph of the property and you remove the street number, you automatically increase the desire for that prospective seller to know where the property is and how much it is. And if that goes out ahead of the for sale sign going up, especially to surrounding properties, you can be assured that that is an active property seller. So to answer your question, James, how do you move across? You simply follow the protocols. You move from Foothold. Once you've got that seed listing at the front end, you start to engage through understanding that you'll soon have sales inquiry, making sure that you're open for inspection is well attended. Then you move to the regenerative prospecting process, which encompasses the three. The first thing that you do is you get a just listed out there that deliberately and openly invites property sellers researching the market to contact you, where you'll give them information about this and any of your other pre-release properties before they go to market. Secondly, you send an open for inspection invitation once the sign's up, and make sure it is ahead of the very first open for inspection, and that invitation needs to say, if you're researching the market ahead of selling, we'd like you to feel that this is a welcome home, that you can come and check this out in contrast to your other. And whilst you're there, don't forget to ask, which is our next big thing, for the property seller's research kit. This is actually taking a advisory and helpful role while someone's in that state of gestation. Now, this will then cause you to be atop of the shopping list when it comes to selling. Once you've done that, you run the open for inspection and then make sure that you've got good, strong, qualifying techniques to get or give you the opportunity to separate, to disseminate those people coming to the open for inspection that are buyers from sellers. This is the next phase. Then with the follow-up of the open for inspection, we use what we call an assumptive close. The assumptive close is pretty simple. When you're calling people back, you just run an assumption that they are indeed selling and let them justify that back the other way. Why? Well, it's easier to run an assumptive close with Australian and New Zealand, within the confines, I should say, of Australian and New Zealand culture. See, Australians and New Zealanders do not respond very well to direct confrontation. If you say to a New Zealander or an Australian, are you selling, or do you have to sell before you buy? Have you had anyone come down and tell you what your property's worth in order for you to actually go ahead and buy? They quite often, they don't take necessarily offence to it, but they brick wall you, because we're just not that way inclined culturally. We don't openly articulate, if they did, how perfect would that be, that they are actually selling until they're ready to divulge that information. But if you adopt an advisory role and you're giving information, you're giving them the smarts for them to very, very quickly and readily determine the comparative value. And especially if you come in and then explain that market value usually exceeds that of comparison, well, then you will be a standout for choice. So that's where I would move to. I hope that this helps. Any questions, further questions that you might have around this particular thread, please drop it down the bottom and I'll be sure and answer it on Facebook as best I can. And any questions that you have, I'll be on air again next week, this time typically live from one of our real estate agencies that we work with. So please feel welcome to call me anytime or call upon me and ask Mark anything. Oops.